From our studios in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and I'm Philip. I am, as always, joined by my co-host, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. And Scott, the Main Street Electrical Parade is back in a new form in Paris.
It's flying!
It's flying! So this has been like a week old. We didn't talk about it last week, but we're talking about it this week. Because on January 8th, Disneyland Paris debuted the Disney Electrical Sky Parade. An all-new nighttime show honors the Main Street Electrical Parade by illuminating the sky with approximately 500 drones parading over Sleeping Beauty Castle in the form of floats, including the Mickey and Friends train, Elliot from Pete's Dragon, and Cinderella's carriage. So this is something we've talked about with, of course, at the big drone show at IAPA. We talked about it during that time, but just really talking about how drone shows really could be a great addition to theme parks in the future. They ostensibly are more sustainable in terms of, they could run more frequently without checking for winds, and there's all this stuff. They're cheaper potentially if you're not, consuming stuff every time
they're more
fire
expensive
fireworks.
up front. They're more expensive up front, but the amount of consumables is I believe negligible. I mean, yes, you'd have to recharge them and you have to maintain them, but in comparison to the amount of explosives that has to happen with fireworks displays, they're negligible. Now, so the thing that fascinates me about this particular story is I have yet to be a huge, jump up and down, thrilled, can't believe it fan of drone shows. I think drone shows are amazing. I think they're beautiful. I think they are, people who say that they are a replacement for fireworks shows, I think they lack, at least with its current technology, I think they lack a certain level of, pardon the pun, explosive excitement. Because everything morphs and changes and yes, there are some more exciting moments. The grandeur, I mean, the fact that you're able to get what look like fireworks to morph into scenes and come to life and animate, I think is great. I think it's amazing. But in the clips that I've seen of this one so far, what this has done is tied into every ounce of nostalgia from the Main Street Electrical Parade. Even down to some of the same images, like they said, the train and Elliot from Pete's Dragon and Cinderella's carriage. Elliot from Pete's Dragon, I mean, it's like that is so far from a recent film or even one that small children will know, but it was one of the most memorable Main Street Electrical Parade floats, images, etc. I mean, I didn't see the Main Street Electrical Parade. Oh, yeah, I guess I did. I saw it in Florida, but I also saw the aquatic version in Florida, which they used to do out over the lagoon, and they do them on floating barges at night for the hotel guests, which was pretty cool as well. But I just think this is a perfect example of taking something that has heartfelt nostalgia and applying new technology to it. I think we're seeing this, I think we're seeing this with, we mentioned Country Bear Jamboree on one of the previous shows. We're starting to see that Disney's going, we've got these great stories that we've been telling for years, but now we've got new technology so we can actually do it right or do it in a different way. And I think that's what's exciting about this particular story.
I agree with that. I like the idea of changing the way, some of the tools that we can tell stories with and thinking of the sky as more of a canvas that you can extend the story onto. I like that aspect. And it actually, I think, I agree with your point about it not being as, like sparkly and exciting. It really, at this point, I think maybe in the future, it could be if you tie in, more effects and even physical effects on the ground. I think there's ways to make it more exciting. But it reminds me of at Disneyland where really, it's almost like a 50% chance that the fireworks are going to go off, even when they're scheduled to go off just because of the wind, right? So, sometimes you'll have so many people that are waiting for it and then it just doesn't happen. And, at Disneyland, there's a lot of extensions they've done. Now they have the water show that happens at Rivers of America. They have the projections that happen on the Small World. They have the Main Street projections. And if you remember we don't talk about Bruno that would play at projected onto the Small World area. So I kind of think that this philosophy of, can we extend the story onto different canvases and play it? They've been testing for a while, and I almost think it might be like a crowd training thing.
Of
I
course.
think it's like, I think eventually it'll be like we'll kind of get used to. Well, I don't know. It's kind of like, we remember the way parks used to be, right? But things change.
Absolutely. No, and I think that this is, I think that harkens back to what I was kind of trying to lean into, is the fact that they're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to here's the old things that we know are tried and true. What they're doing is they're taking the things that they know are tried and true and utilizing new technology to tell the story in a different medium. And I think that's really exciting. I also, you bring up a good point, and that is the fact that Disney has been exploring with projection mapping and water shows and projection on water and all that kind of stuff for quite some time now. And even the images that I've seen of this sky parade utilizes projection mapping on the castle.
Yep.
So, it's another tool in the toolbox. I think it's a very effective tool. I think it has the potential to be really, really interesting. I mean, yes, weather does impact drone flying to a certain extent,
Mm-hmm.
and drone technology. I worked parallel to a smaller drone show not too long ago, and there are still some technological issues with drones, but that technology is continuing to increase and improve every single day. And the biggest issue is sometimes they just lose contact and decide, I'm going to land now.
Yep.
So they have to make certain that everybody's like, well, it's like fireworks, only you don't have to worry about fallout. Actually, you do still have to worry about fallout, because they don't necessarily drop like bullets or like flaming ash with a firework. They do, but they do come just basically straight down and decide, you know what, I'm going to stop now.
Yeah. Well, something to watch for sure, and it's one of the trends that we talked about.
Yep.
So meanwhile, Puy du Fou is going to open an immersive theater in China. An immersive theater of Puy du Fou, a major theme park operator in France known for its historical presentations, is slated to begin trial operations in the first half of 2024 in China. The Saga City of Light project, with more than 650 million yuan, which is just over 90 million US dollars, in investment, will take up over 46,000 square meters at the West Pavilion of Shanghai Everbright Convention and Exhibitor Center. It'll feature a giant theater, themed catering, a cafe, and a cultural and entertainment amenities, creating a film-like immersive experience. The project will comprise of approximately 150 actors and 50 large-scale film scenes with 26,000 vintage-style objects. It will take approximately 2 hours, and it's going to recreate scenes from 1930s Shanghai. The audience will act as principal protagonists as they explore the journey, and they'll go through several gates where they can make different choices. That's kind of all the information we have about it. So it reminds me of reading stories about China is always funny to me, because it's like, there are vague details, but not concrete details. It's always those things where you're like, and you're always like, But it does, to me, when I first read this, it sounded a little bit like the Sphere experience that we just talked about when I went to in Vegas, where it's like, it is like a film, like I said, a film viewing experience, but they're adding a bunch of elements and actors and moments to kind of, adjust it a little bit. It also made me think that, we all know China's struggling and their tourism is not recovering at all. And who knows how long it will take to recover. And so to me, it's like, oh, this is smart because it's targeting the domestic market for locals, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking up space inside of a convention center, just like the Sphere, but they're taking up space that probably is not going to be utilized by international or large conventions from outside the country. So it's like they're repurposing space to target domestic audience. And it is classically China in that they are telling a story about Chinese culture, which is popular in China.
It's also classically Puy du Fou, which is telling historic, recreating historic great moments in history in a larger than life cinematic way. Of course, if you've ever heard me talk, well, actually on the show, you've heard me talk about it, but over and over again, whenever I talk about quote unquote immersive experiences in immersive theater, there are several litmus tests. And just in this as you say, very vague information. But even in this information, as well as some of the preview promotional videos that I've seen for this, it really ticks all the boxes. So it truly is what I would consider immersive. Using phrases like the guests will become the key protagonists. They actually play a role in the
Yep, they have a
experience.
role.
They have a either real or perceived control over the outcome of the story. With the multiple gates that they talk about going in one direction or another, and how that impacts or affects the overarching story arc. For those people who are sitting, because there are plenty of people that I talk to when I start talking about immersive theater, they're like, "Oh, that's just for small experimental groups." This is a perfect example that it's not. They've started to do this in New York with certain shows. They're starting to do. I mean, this is obviously a huge investment in China. I think that from an industry standpoint, we all need to be basically put on point to recognize this immersive quality is going to really blur the lines between show and culinary and merchandise and theme park. And is this? I mean, could you say that this is a 2-hour theatrical experience, or is it 2 hours in an immersive theme park, or is it 2 hours setting you up to go to the gift shop? Is it 2 hours to set you up to go to the cafe? Is it? It's really hard to say what this is, and I think just in what I've read and what I'm seeing with other projects around the world, is that the idea of what is this exactly fitting into a nice little box is getting really blurry. We've talked a lot about. I mean, it's sort of like taking the M&M experience, which is one that's been around for a very, very long time, but taking the M&M experience and blowing it way out of the water, or the Coke experience. What Coca-Cola has done with their interactive and immersive installations around the world. It's taking that and kind of blowing it completely up. I worked very briefly on a project that was supposed to go into Vegas. This was many, many years ago, and the project failed to get fully funded because it was too progressive. But it's almost exactly like this, only it was not historically based. It was it was actually based on a famous person's acid trip, but it was one of those situations where it did the exact same thing. It put the guests in the situation in a different time period, with weird things that would happen and change and morph the story forward, and everything about it required the guests to participate, required them to interact and become immersed truly in the experience. I am very excited to see how this is going to turn out. It's to me, and again, Puy du Fou has never done things tiny.
Yeah.
I've
They
never
do great
visited the
stuff.
park, and boy, I would love to. I have yet to visit the park. However, I have seen multiple videos of many shows throughout the years, and it's in the park. It's all about telling the history of that part of France. So this just seems like, I almost asked the question: is Puy du Fou the next Cirque du Soleil? Are they going to now start these installations doing what they've been so incredibly successful with in France? Are they going to start doing these immersive kinds of installations around the world and set up the next? Obviously it's not circus, but setting up the next redefinement of theater. Redefinement, not really a word, but the redefining of theater. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm excited about it I agree with all that. I'm also excited about it because we have so much property that is kind of utilized in theaters and screens and whatnot. And it just seems to me like, watching movies is going to need to evolve in some way. And I like things like this because I think it kind of pushes that. And of course, this is like you said, a grand scale, right? It's an enormous
Right.
scale.
And the way I'm interpreting this or understanding this is it is a combination of, when they say film, I think they're talking about you feel as though you are part of a film as opposed to sitting and watching a film. I realize that film and projection is part of the experience.
Yeah.
But I think, whether it's a film space or whether it's, let's face it, brick and mortar stores, there have been several smaller articles that I've seen not too long ago about, is entertainment the way that shopping malls will be saved and not have to be torn down and start from scratch.
Yeah.
To me, that seems to be more along the lines of this, is like, here's a gigantic space that they were hoping to use for some sort of convention or exhibition rental. And as you say, tourism hasn't come back. So this is a perfect utilization of the space that generates revenue, and also is a proof of concept.
Yeah. I guess we will see, right? Because we don't know. It just says 50 large-scale film scenes. It says film scenes. We don't know if that's like, if there's projection involved or if you're watching segments or if it means that you are in a film. I don't know. I guess again, we'll see how it develops.
Just vague enough.
Just vague enough. Yeah, really. It's just vague enough to make no promises, but get you excited, which is classic China as well. I think that...
well, watching the preview for it just got me jazzed.
Yeah, it looked really good. I think the one last thing I want to say is that, I do think the evolution is important. And I think this really reminds me of what the Tampa Theater does over there. When I spoke with Jill about that over in their, how they really try and create, extended experiences, even if it's just one actor or some sort of extended experience, and make like watch parties and just really try and evolve the experience of a theatrical experience. And I think that there's just a lot. We have so many spaces, and I even think down here locally, we have a few independent theaters that are always doing just really fun stuff, and are finding ways to utilize the spaces in between the seats and the rows, and just ways to add in immersive elements. Not the full thing, of course, like with this where you're playing a role, but add in immersive elements to make it a little bit more than just watching a film or just
basically rethinking what their number one asset, the theater itself, can do and how it can be utilized. I don't know whether when you were talking to Jill, so we're talking about the Tampa Theater, which is a beautifully restored vintage movie theater from the 20s, and Jill Witecki is their marketing director, and Philip has met and interviewed her, and I've known Jill for a long time. And one of the things that I think is amazing about what the team does at Tampa Theater is they recognize that the vintage quality of the theater is really so much their brand. But they also recognize that the theater can be utilized in many different ways. It is, let me see if I can paint this picture. There is a raked main floor, and then there is a balcony. They have the ability to take the raked main floor, and they did this as a capital investment years ago. They can take the raked main floor, elevate it up to the stage level in front of the movie screen, and set it up for full service dining. And they do some of their highest fundraisers by doing that. So they basically cover the seats with platforming, and it becomes the most beautiful dining room in the city of Tampa because it's in the middle of this
they do so much.
Guild theater. It's amazing, the clever things
they do. And they have so many, they have a whole, I interviewed them for their Halloween programming, but anyway, they do a lot. So anyway, okay. I have one other story.
But again, to your point though, I think this is a perfect example and a grand scale example of how to rethink, how do we use facilities,
spaces.
How do we use facilities, and whether this is in a convention center or a theater or an old Target, it could be applicable, or elements of it could be applicable in all of those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the last thing I was going to say on this, and just, final word, and then I'll move on to the next story. It's just, I'm also excited about this because I think experiences like, I know it's a new building and a new thing, but I think that, at least my impression of reading it is that, again, the whole vagary thing, it seems like it's set up where they could change the content if, so basically once tourism has opened back up again and you have a lot more international guests coming in, I feel like they could make a new version or a different version, that then they could market to travelers. So I feel like that's, again, thinking about how you reutilize your assets and the replayability of things is so important nowadays, I think, because, you don't want to, again, just have to keep rebuilding buildings.
Right. Have they built an immersive experience, or have they built an immersive theater where the experience can change with different content?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I'm hoping it's the second, but
me too.
It kind of sounds that way. But
it does. We'll see. Okay, we have another story here. Okay, our last story is going to be, this is something from Sabri Benishaw, who I love. I love Sabri's work, and it's from the show Marketplace. And it basically is a story about dynamic dining. So dynamic pricing for dining. And it doesn't say it exactly like that, so I'm kind of, interpreting, but that's something that we have had for quite a while in the themed entertainment space, right? Is dynamic pricing. We talk about dynamic pricing all the time, and we talked about how the pandemic really did allow us to go further down that road because it's easier on digital to be able to control the pricing models, and it also allowed you to do stuff like virtual queues and all this kind of stuff. We have this huge exposure, but I've never really heard about dynamic pricing when it comes to food, and variable pricing as well, which this story was about. And I thought it was so interesting to think about the pricing and then to think about how could that come in, how and should that impact theme parks. And I'll read a few excerpts from this. Just keep in mind, this was a audio story created for Marketplace, which is a radio show. So it's not exactly an article per se. So I will read excerpts from it, but just, I'll put the link if you want to listen to the full story in the show notes. But so industries that can change prices in real time have had the technology to do that, which we just talked about. But restaurants and their customers were not as digitally inclined where food was concerned until the pandemic. After the pandemic drove the industry towards more digitalization, then it became much more easy to change prices based on the variety of factors multiple times. This is a quote from the CEO of Juicer, which sells a service that allows restaurants to rapidly change their prices on their digital menus, whether that be online ordering or for the drive-through. So for example, if it's Super Bowl Sunday and everyone's ordering the wings, they might be able to price up the wings slightly. If there are slow times in a restaurant, those are great times for restaurants to use discounts or discounted pricing to encourage guests to order during those time periods. Another thing it's very useful for is to manage their inventory, because if they have a lot of chicken left over or whatnot, because chicken dishes are not selling, then they can use this as a way to help manage their inventory to make sure they're not doing any food waste, which I think is an excellent point. They also brought up this thing, which I feel like Scott's going to have a lot to talk about. They also brought up the concept of variable pricing, which as the sources in the article define it, variable pricing would be different customers have different prices. So dynamic pricing is very, environmental impacts, basically, demand and whatnot can change the pricing. Variable is like different people have different prices, like different people pay different prices. And they mention a few examples here where there are apps like Dorsia that let very high-paying diners make last-minute reservations at places that are otherwise sold out. And so that to me is one where I'm like, so I could see so many things. First, I could see you being able to use dynamic pricing as a way to move people around to restaurants that are not being served. And also to the food waste is a huge thing in theme parks, and that would be excellent. But then I was like, so basically, I mean, we know it's been a secret for a while, like a known secret, right? That if you're a Club 33 member, you could probably get a reservation at some place if you really wanted to or whatnot. But I was like, well, what if there was a much more blatant way of creating another velvet rope, which is like, if you have this tier of whatever, then you can just make a reservation anywhere, and we'll force it into the system.
So let me, since we started,
there's so much to unpack there, right, Scott?
Yeah. Since we started this episode by talking about something that was utilizing technology to re-embrace something that had a long-standing recognizable factor. Back in the old days, restaurants did their menus on chalkboards.
Yeah.
And the reason for
Yeah.
that was so that they could use dynamic pricing based on what they have. There is, blue plate special or the manager's special. That means we've got extra chicken that is going to go bad, so we've got to sell it fast. So the idea of dynamic pricing in the restaurant industry really is not new at all. The
It's not new
ability
in the
to
restaurants, but the theme park stuff, you know how
but what
crazy people are, they track Disney prices. They'd
I
be screenshotting.
I completely understand that. What I'm saying is, with this technology, you can do it, first of all, significantly quicker. Secondly, significantly
Yep.
more subtly. And thirdly, you can say, instead of saying, our chicken stew is about to go bad, you do a bomb blast of a flash sale. We've all gotten used to flash sales for online, especially during the holiday season. You look for the flash sale. So it's like, when is this going to go down in price? They were always afraid to do flash sales because they always felt that people would, in theme parks, because they were afraid that people would hold off and not purchase until the flash sale happened. I think we're past that. I think we're
Yeah.
more used to, if we can catch a great deal, great, we catch a great deal. This is something that Disney has. Many theme parks have taken to use dynamic pricing based on how based on previous years' attendance. Quite honestly, that was the first round. Now they have the ability to do it based on weather if they choose to. They have the ability to do it based on booking. For many years, and I think it's still true. The Disney resort rates, the hotel rates, were based on how booked the hotel was at the time. This is something that airlines have been doing forever. And speaking of airlines, Philip, you mentioned that additional velvet rope. Well, it's no different than being a Mileage Plus member for Delta, because the moment a flight is canceled, who do they go to first to make certain they have flights that they want? It's the Delta Plus people. I know that because I'm not a Delta Plus person, and whenever I fly Delta, if my flight gets canceled, it takes me forever to find a new booking, because they go to their valued clients first. They go to the people who've already given them a ton of money. So again, I see no problem with that. I think it is something that can definitely be incorporated, especially since the technology is there. And when it comes to food, dynamic pricing to me is just low-hanging fruit. I think you have the opportunity to have, perhaps even in your long-range planning, in your master planning, have recipes that utilize key elements that are perishable, so that you can just plug in those recipes and all of a sudden go, we've got, and I'm sure there's a program that will tell you how to do this too. There's AI programs that will do pretty much anything, but an algorithm that says we have chicken that is approaching its deadline, we have tomatoes, and we have sugar. So now we have sweet chicken and tomatoes. I don't know, but creates recipes, creates new products that can go on sale. And not only does it then create this wonderful sense of, hey, there's something new at the restaurant, it also gives a lower price and helps with food waste.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is something that can definitely be installed or instituted at theme parks really everywhere.
Like, I was thinking about along the same lines as you. Of course, I'm like, well, obviously it makes sense in restaurants, and of course it's been around for a while. But then I got to thinking about, I guess, more like the reality of the situation, which is just that, like, I don't know, theme park people are crazy. I don't know. I mean, as a theme park person, I say I'm also crazy. It's like, I think there's so many people, especially the Disney Universal properties, that like they know that, they have their almost like it's like a favorite restaurant, but it's in the park, right? And they know how much it is. I mean, they're very attuned to what it is, and there are people constantly that are looking out for anything new at Disney. So I just wonder about that, in like the reality of that in real time. Like if they just go in and adjust the churro at this place is cheaper because they need to get churros out, like, is that gonna
We just set it up as a flash sale. I mean, you just set it up as a flash sale. It's all about packaging. It's not about
It's just that's
stuff.
never. I don't think that's ever happened at a theme park before. I think is my point. Like this sounds obvious, but I've never heard or seen or even thought. It's one of those things where like, yeah, duh, we should do it, but no one's ever done it.
It's in restaurant. It's the soup of the day mentality. Soup of the day is yesterday's special in water. I mean, that's just what it is. So
that doesn't happen at theme parks,
but it does. It does. It doesn't happen at Disney because Disney
or Universal.
It doesn't happen at corporate parks, but it does happen at SeaWorld parks and entertainment parks. I know that because I've been there when it happened. You when you have the flexibility, by making everything corporate and put into nice little boxes, it makes it really easy and predictable. But as we've learned, we are not living in a predictable world. And sometimes that chaos theory or that lack of predictability benefits the business because it gives you more flexibility to adjust and adapt based on real world scenarios. I mean, let's face it, it's really just about training the audience. If you think about it, audiences had a fit when they went into dynamic pricing. They had a fit when it was, what do you mean my Disney ticket is not going to always cost X amount of dollars? But now it's commonplace. Everyone expects it. So now it's become this additional game. They've created they've gamified ticket buying, great. So again, I think this is something that can, as you say, has not been explored, but certainly can be explored. I will say that generally speaking, culinary, is the last in theme park to adapt to new trends. And I don't know why, and that's not me being negative because I'm certainly not a culinary expert, but I think that it is something that can be applied, and especially if this software is available and they start to target the theme park culinary departments, be prepared to watch that ebb and flow of pricing when it comes to goods that have an expiration date on them. Speaking of expiration date, our time has expired. So, I know that is one of the weakest transitions I have ever made. But no, it's not, Scott. You've made worse. Anyway, on behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and the Haunted Attraction Network and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development, this has been Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week.